Welcome, everybody, to our first absentee learning podcast. My name, of course, is Dave Mathwin, and I'm delighted to be with Mr. Wes Stepler, a senior at Fontis this year. We hope that you'll enjoy these conversations, and by all means, contact us. Let us know what interviews you might like to hear in the future and the people you'd like to hear from. Well, Wes, let's get right to it. You came to Fontis in 8th grade, correct?
Mm-hmm.
From a homeschooling background?
Yeah.
Tell me about that transition. What was it like to transition? What was it like to come to AFA from your educational background? How did you find it?
Yeah, so I was at a point in 7th grade doing homeschool that I felt pretty ready to move on to something else. The original plan that my family had was that we would all, me and my two sisters, would all homeschool through middle school and then go to public high school. So when I was in 7th grade, both of them were in public high school, so it was just me at the house doing school, which got kind of lonely after a while. So in I think around February of that year, Mrs. Smith called up my mom and said, hey, the school that I work at has a kindergarten position open. Are you interested? It was a new thing to me because it's not something I expected, but it was something I was excited about and definitely willing to try. And then when I got there the next fall, the transition definitely was not like perfectly smooth. It wasn't horrible, obviously, but adjusting to the workload was a big one for me. I was pretty okay with working independently because I did a lot of that throughout homeschool. But then there's, of course, the other aspect of adjusting to the social aspect of it. And it's not just, you and your parents and siblings at home. It's you interacting with a bunch of other kids your age, which wasn't like this big, horrible thing for us. We weren't the type of homeschool family that they never go outside or they never have like that. That wasn't us.
Wait, isn't that every homeschooling family?
So I think the hardest part of the transition was the workload and learning how to balance my time. Because it used to be, okay, I finished my work and now I'm done. I can do whatever. But when I started at AFA, it was, okay, I do 8 hours of my school day. I come home, but wait, I still have more work to do and I have to balance that time so I'm not, up until 1 a.m. finishing whatever assignment that I have left.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've seen with this whole distance learning phenomenon that everybody's doing, some students are struggling with that again, of how to budget their time and so forth. How's that gone for you? Have you found, is it a reversion to the old homeschool days, or do you find the sailing fairly smooth?
Yeah, so this is something that when talking to other people about it, I've said I was able to kind of kick back into that sort of the homeschool instincts of being able to work from home, balance my time, and do all that well. That does not necessarily mean that I'm enjoying doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I know how to do it and I can get the work done and I've fallen back into that routine, but it's definitely harder than it used to be. Because one, I'm not a 7th grader, I'm a senior and I've been working through AFA senior things. But then also you have the actual life at school in class with people to compare it to. And it's not just, this is what I've always done. I always do my work from home. This is how I roll. So having to go back to that after having had the experience of being at school with people and being at AFA, like that definitely made it harder.
Yeah, we've had some students say that they won't complain about school again, but then they're more honest and say, they won't complain about being at school again. So you've been here since 8th grade. What have been? Can you hit on a couple of, we might say, lows and highs of your time here? Maybe start with the lows. What have been some of the, what were some times maybe when you questioned, were there any times when you questioned the decision to be at AFA?
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, the transition was a little bit rough for me from homeschool to AFA at times. So that first semester of 8th grade for me was a little bit difficult, figuring out like where I was and where I fit in with my class, and adjusting to all of those things. I don't think I ever necessarily had a point where I thought I don't want to come back, but I did think a couple times in 8th grade, like, if I'm going to leave, I'm not going to make that decision this year. I'm going to make it after freshman year, because I want to see what high school is like, and how I do with that, so I don't leave now and then miss out on something that could have been great. In terms of other quote unquote low points, there were some rough patches for me freshman year. That was just in general kind of an off year for my class. We hadn't quite figured out who we were yet. But I'm really glad that I stayed, because I think one of my highs was probably a good bit of 10th grade, because that was the first year that we started as a class to really start doing things together and really becoming good friends with each other and enjoying each other's company and doing things together outside of school. So I was really glad that I stayed for that. I think the two other highs that come to mind are I've had some really good times being a house leader. That's given me some really cool opportunities that I'm very thankful I've had. And the first semester of this year was a really good one for me. The second semester obviously has been rough for a whole host of reasons, but first semester of this year was a lot of fun, and I think a really good time for the senior class as a whole.
You mentioned that you were going to stick it out at least for 1 year of high school, but then you also said, oh, that first year of high school wasn't so great either. What made you want to stay and come back then for 10th grade?
I think part of it was I knew that, like, for me at least, and the kind of person that I am, for whatever like not great stuff was happening during that year, that freshman year for me, I think had I gone to public high school, it would have been worse, just because of like my personality and the things that I'm suited to, I guess. But then also I felt pretty strongly towards the end of freshman year about running for house leadership, because that was a thing that freshman year was also a bit of an off year for my house, and that was something that I saw and something I didn't like, and I wanted to help and do what I could to change that. So when they opened it to rising sophomores to run, it just kind of felt like something that I knew I should be doing, and that I think too was probably part of what kept me here. But I don't think there was ever a time where I felt like I didn't want to come back.
Yeah, so you mentioned the house system, and some of our viewers might not be aware of what that is, so I'll give a real brief overview. We have 4 houses at AFA. These houses are comprised of a mixed group of guys and gals from grades 7 through 12, and each house has their own, house colors, own house leaders, and some of their own house traditions. We have House Atlantis, House Athens, House Rome, and Wes, you're part of House Ilium. So you mentioned house leadership as a big thing for you, and when you graduate this May, you will have graduated as the longest tenured house leader that we've ever had. So congratulations on that. So talk a little bit about house leadership and how that has shaped your experience at AFA and how it shaped you as well.
Mm-hmm. So I think house leadership was, for me, one of the biggest things in terms of, I guess, forming who I am now. It gave me a lot of challenges to face, and it made me realize a lot of things about myself. I think that I didn't fully get what the job was until I was in it. Like, I thought, yeah, I can do this. Like, it's cool. Like, house, whatever. Like, yeah, I can do it. And then when you actually are thrown into the middle of it, you realize, like, oh, snap, this is more challenging than I thought, and I can't do it just on my own. I can't just say, yeah, I got this and figure it out. Like, you have to talk to your other house leader in your house. You have to talk to the house heads in your other houses. It's a group effort
Can
And
you?
I think that I
I'm
think
sorry.
that
See, there we go. Zoom is. I forgot how Zoom works. So you mentioned, all right. So you had this idea of what it was, and then can you give us something specific? Like, okay, yeah, I realized I couldn't really do X by myself. Can you name something specific that hit you hard and fast that made you really reevaluate what you were about?
I think it was just one of the biggest things for me was like trying to really take leadership of the whole house, which is really what that job is about. Like, you are the leader, you're, as a house head, at least you are the leader and you're in charge. It's your responsibility. For me, I guess that just was something that I thought would come easier than it did. And then when I actually was thrown into it and had to utilize that and do that well, it was something that I realized was harder than I thought it would be. And it took some patience and, I guess, self-evaluation on my part to figure out what kind of a leader I needed to be and what kind of a leader I should be.
So talk to me about that transition. You said you had to find out what kind of leader you wanted to be, or you thought you needed to be, and maybe that was different than what you initially thought. How did you change? How did it change you, this being in this position of, I guess, assistant house leader first, and then this year senior, the house leader?
I think it just kind of gave me a broader and better perspective on things. Being in leadership sort of makes you realize that there's more to the house system than just things like the competitions, because that for me was a really big thing. When I was in 8th grade and a freshman, I was very competitive. I really loved the competitions, and they were a really big deal to me. And I didn't always take it so great if we lost, which happened relatively often in my first couple of years here. And then taking up that leadership role in 10th grade, it kind of made me realize, okay, winning competitions does not define whether or not you're a good house. There's more to the house system than winning or losing. You have to take like the integrity of your house and the culture of your house into account, and that needs to come before concerns of, okay, we need to win or we need to lose. So it just gave me, I guess, a better perspective on that and just the overall purpose of the house system and why we have it in place.
Yes, good. So you're a senior this year, a senior house leader, a senior house head, I should say, for the first time. And, now the house year is cut short. What has this given you any kind of perspective on what your time as a house leader, as a student, has meant for you?
I don't think it's necessarily even for me fully sunk in yet, all of this for me. It kind of hit me the other day, because mainly the lines I've been thinking along were, we're in all likelihood closed for the rest of the year. So that means all of these things about senior year that were supposed to happen, our thesis presentations, Spirit Week, a couple other senior traditions, senior skip day, aren't going to happen. And like, man, that's kind of a bummer. But then I was thinking about more the other day, and it kind of hit me too that like this also pretty much cut short like the rest of my time at the school in general. And that's a really sad thing to think about. So I guess this time has made me more, if anything, grateful for the community that I've been a part of with my class, the school in general, my house, just because of how terrible it is to not have that. Like you kind of realize you take it for granted because it's something you're a part of every day. It's something you go to every day. And now you don't have that, and you realize how great and how important that was to you. But it's a bummer because you realize that, but there's not much you can do about it now because we're all stuck at home.
Yeah. We've all lost so much as a result of this, as a result of what's happened. And one of the things that we've lost is the senior thesis presentations. which were a highlight of the year for the seniors, but the whole school would get involved and come to see them. So we can't do every senior, but I wanted to take this time to highlight at least a few seniors and their papers, including yours, Wes. You wrote about the use of computer technology in warfare. So I thought was, we've never had a thesis like this before. And I looked over it. I thought, this is, so well sourced, such an interesting perspective. Can you tell me what got you interested in this topic?
Yeah, so I think the main driver to it was my interest and intent to study computer science in college. I took junior year, we started to offer the computer programming elective again, and I took that with Mr. Carey. I'm taking it again this year. And over the summer and just on my free time, I've been occasionally working on some coding problems, programming challenges, just to better my skills at that. So technology and computer programming has become something that's important to me, something I think is interesting and cool to study. I think the math and science behind it is neat. So that got me thinking for my thesis this year of, okay, I think it'd be cool to write something on artificial intelligence. But I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do in that vein. And I honestly don't remember when it came up, but I think it was during research for a smaller paper I was writing at the beginning of the year in rhetoric that I came across this weird thing called an autonomous weapon system. And I was like, hey, that's interesting. What are those about? And then I read more about them and just felt like, yep, this is definitely something that I am interested in and something I think is thesis worthy and that I could write a paper on.
So tell me the basic argument you had for your thesis. What in about 1 minute, 30 seconds a minute, can you tell us, here's what I'm arguing?
Mm-hmm. So I am arguing that specifically lethal autonomous weapon systems, not necessarily all autonomous weapon system ever, but the ones that have the capability of using lethal force, should not be deployed and used in the military because there's too many ethical problems and safety problems. And then on top of that, we don't really understand how they work at a fundamental level. There's types of artificial intelligence and machine learning that reach conclusions in ways that humans can't understand, which could lead to potentially an autonomous system choosing to kill somebody or destroy something. And when we go back and try to figure out, okay, why did it do that? We might not know. And that's a little bit disturbing to think about.
So I find this interesting, Wes. It's a really interesting topic. C.S. Lewis at one point talked about the fact that our technology will increase so dramatically, but it will eventually outstrip kind of like our moral sensibility, mm-hmm. and will create this kind of disconnect between the two. And this is a problem that, there's always been a problem with, shall we say, ethics and the use of force since the dawn of time. But the problem of technology and the use of force has accelerated dramatically in ways quite new. Maybe not, and maybe this acceleration started happening maybe even early in the 20th century, but certainly with digital technology, it has accelerated dramatically. So I think this topic is a really interesting one. But what I'd like to do now is push back a little bit, right? If I were a panel member, I'd poke you with some questions and to play devil's advocate a bit. So, Wes, you argue that we should not use these autonomous weapon systems. One of the things you said was it might do a thing, it might do a wrong thing, and we wouldn't know what that wrong thing was exactly. We may not understand it. But aren't human beings also mysteries too? A human being can do a wrong thing and may not be entirely sure why they did it, and nor would other people be entirely sure why they did it. So what's the essential difference in your opinion?
Right. So, and this is a really important thing that needs to be addressed. in this argument if you're going to argue against these things. The two biggest problems with lethal autonomous weapon systems as opposed to just human soldiers is, in general, if a soldier does something wrong or commits a crime or things like that, there can be, like, justice can be served on that end, and there could be a trial, and you can figure out, like, okay, why did you do that? What was your intent behind that decision? Like, what caused you to make that decision? But computers don't have any form of intent or any form of moral agency. They're just going to do what they're programmed to do. And then the other side of that, the other aspect of it is human error is always going to be a thing because humans are the ones behind developing the technology, testing the technology, operating the technology in some cases, and so on. So when you put human error into something as powerful as an autonomous system, the destruction that it could cause would be much more powerful than a human could cause on its own. So, for example, Russia at the moment is, I think, currently trying to develop a autonomous missile that can carry a 100 megaton nuclear payload that could be delivered to American ports in sort of a last-ditch effort to save the country should some sort of war break out. So giving a computer the power to control a nuclear weapon all it would take would be one small glitch or mess up in that computer for things to go horribly wrong very, very fast.
Yes, that makes sense. And I understand that. But again, if we're going to have any system, there could be a human, right, with a button, a nuclear, his finger on the button, shall we say, or our president, whoever the president is, can give an order to launch lots and lots of nuclear weapons. Why is it exactly that you believe that human error will be less catastrophic, or human moral failing will be less problematic than machine failure?
So I think, again, it goes back to, one, just the scale of the potential error. I understand, obviously, too, that if you have a human in the loop on a nuclear machine and accidentally launches the nuke, that's pretty much equally as bad as a computer launching the nuke. But another problem with artificial intelligence is that would make this problematic is that they don't have any understanding of causation. So they can, artificial intelligence are really good at doing calculations and determining, like, probability of things and things along that line. But they still seriously lack a lot of the abilities of the human brain of being able to think and reason about the situation that they're in. So they're pretty much essentially entirely statistical. So their judgment in a situation like that would not be nearly as good as the judgment of a human who still might make mistakes, but has a better sense of judgment and understanding than the machine would.
What would you say, Wes, to the idea that the United States as a global power has a lot of commitments overseas, right? Number one, so we acknowledge that. We have a lot of international commitments. Secondly, right, we have, we're a democracy, and democracies tend to be wary in many ways, I think, of having too much commitment of troops. We send troops out. We want them to come back home, as more or less as soon as we can. I think this is one of the better arguments against the idea that America is a militaristic empire. The American people, generally speaking, want their soldiers to come home as soon as they can. So what would you argue, how would you respond to the argument that we have these multifaceted international commitments, there are multiple problem areas overseas. Autonomous weapon systems allow us to, shall we say, not withdraw from those commitments, while at the same time preserving the health of our, not just the physical well-being of our military, but the the psychological, physical well-being of our military and the well-being of our democracy. I think it was Dwight Eisenhower that thought that one reason why we should build up our nuclear arsenal was because the idea of committing troops overseas for long periods of time to ensure security would be anathema to a democratic society. So he said something will have to give. Either our democratic society will have to give, or we'll have to do this. We'll have to use these, shall we say, in some ways, quote, non-human weapons. How would you respond to that argument, that we need these systems to preserve the health of our military, physical and psychological, and to preserve the health of our democracy?
So I think the core of that question comes down to the specification of lethal autonomous systems versus just autonomous systems. A lethal autonomous system is going to would theoretically have the capability to kill, to select and engage at a target using lethal force with no human in the loop. So there's not any human overseeing what it's doing. It's just over there doing its thing. But just an autonomous system could either operate with a human not in the loop and not use lethal force, or you have semi-autonomous or unmanned systems that we use right now, like drones, that have the capability of using lethal force, but there's a human in the loop that's making those decisions. So the biggest point that I tried to get across in my paper is that the biggest problem is taking humans out of the loop. If you have a human in the loop controlling the machine that uses lethal force, that's not necessarily as bad as if you have a human out of the loop and the machine still uses lethal force.
So you're not against guys in a bunker flying a drone per se?
Not necessarily, but in terms of drone pilots, I would counter on the point that we need these systems for the psychological health of our soldiers. I don't have any official stats on this, but I would like to find them, on the idea that the PTSD rates of drone pilots are, I think, just as, if not higher than the PTSD rates of just human soldiers doing their job. Because there's this weird disconnect of when you're a soldier, you're on the battlefield and you have your weapon, you're firing at the enemy that you can see, and you are also in harm's way. Like, you understand that this is war and that this is combat.
Yeah.
But when you're a drone pilot, you're sort of, like you say, just sitting in that bunker. You press a button, people die, and then you just go back to doing whatever it was you were doing. And there's something about that messes with someone's head.
Yeah. I'm going to stop playing panel member for a moment and play Mr. Rathwood. I did talk with a guy from the Air Force a few years ago about this. I didn't know him, but we just were the same kind of Christmas party, whatever. We got to talking. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly, in fact, what he said, that these PTSD rates are higher. And I do think there may be a kind of theological reason for this. Like, right, our actions, there's something unreal, disembodied about, autonomous weapons that makes that, and this disconnect isn't a physical one. It becomes a kind of emotional, psychological bifurcation of sorts. Mm-hmm. That is troubling, I think. You have any? Go ahead.
That's something that I thought about, and something I mentioned in my paper is, if you decide to deploy and use lethal autonomous weapon systems, then that opens the door of the possibility of taking humans out of combat entirely, which sort of takes this cornerstone of warfare that's been in place since war has existed, going all the way back to the ancient battles, and you just take it out of the building. And that's certainly cause for concern, I think.
Mm. So how has this thesis of yours that you've written, and I looked over it, and it's quite excellent, and I wish that many people could see it. So congratulations on it.
Thank you.
How has this changed your view of American foreign policy, American, military might, our international commitments?
So it definitely, my view on this has certainly changed throughout the course of my research. The first source I read was from the Military Review Journal called just Pros and Cons of Autonomous Weapon Systems. And the first part of the article talks about the pros and all of the ways we could use them and the benefits of them. So I read that and thought like, wow, these things are cool.
Mm-hmm.
Like we could totally, and then you read through the ethical problems, you read through the safety problems, you read stories about technology that's already failed on large levels. My favorite of them was the story in the Cold War of the ballistic missile system telling us that Russia launched all of their nukes at us when it was actually just the moon.
I know, and there were lots of, that may be one example. There are many examples of false alarms like that.
Yeah, it's amusing, but also terrifying when you think about
Absolutely.
the implications. In terms of foreign policy and things, I don't think my thinking necessarily went too far into that direction, but it's certainly something to take into account if you're trying to figure out, how do we have, like you were talking about, a military presence in this country or in this area. If we can't use, if we could use these systems, maybe that makes it easier, maybe it makes it more dangerous. It definitely raises questions that need to be answered.
Very good, very good. Wes, I thank you for the paper, and maybe at one point we can get to a real actual panel, but there you go. There's for now. There's your panel questions for your thesis. So, Wes, one of the questions that we ask all of our guests is, what is most challenging? What has been the most challenging part of being at AFA, and what's been the most rewarding part of being at AFA? And you've been here. This will be 5 years for you. As you reflect, how would you answer those questions? The biggest challenge. You want to come here, be prepared for X, but also be prepared to reap these benefits.
Yeah. So for me, honestly, I think the challenge and the reward go hand in hand. And that I thought the most challenging part of being at this school didn't necessarily have as much to do with the academics as it did things more on a personal level. So for me, that I guess looked like, for one, being a house leader and facing the challenges that's going to inevitably bring if you choose to take that position. But then also just being a part of your class, which as you go on through your time at AFA is going to inevitably get smaller and smaller. When I started, we had, I think, 17 people in my 8th grade class, and we have 8 now that are graduating in June. So just kind of learning, I guess, and these are people that you spend so much of your time with. So learning how to, I guess, be a part of the class and adjusting to the class dynamic and being around these people that you're with so often. Like some of that is going to bring challenges, I think, but then you get the reward on the other side of just the incredible and amazing relationships that you get here from students and teachers alike. I'm pretty excited right now of the fact that the senior class in general has, I think, since sophomore year started to grow really close, and this year has definitely done a lot for us in that regard. And I certainly don't want to lose contact with them after we graduate. And at the moment, there is a pretty decent possibility that 6 out of the 8 of us will be within a few hours of each other in college, which is really cool. And I'm really excited for the possibility of being able to see them still on a relatively regular basis and just continue to develop those really, really great friendships that the school has given me the opportunity to make.
Wes, you've hit on something I think that is very true about the AFA experience for students. Small classes is great. You have your kind of defined community. In a larger school, in a larger public school certainly, you'd have plenty of opportunity to, shall we say, ignore certain people or get away from certain social problems. But at AFA, you really don't. what I found is in my time here is that classes usually go through some kind of mill of sorts that grinds them, usually between, I would say, 8th and 9th grade, maybe parts of 10th grade. But if you come through that, the bonds you have with your classmates can be really strong because you've gotten past all those things that might have caused you to ignore people in the past had you been in a larger setting, and you've been through the fire, shall we say, and now, that cements the bond all the more.
Yeah, for sure.
Very good. Very good. Wes, it's been great to talk with you. I'm so glad that you've been a part of AFA for these 5 years, and so sorry for what we're missing as seniors together, but so glad we could talk now, and then you could share some of your thoughts and wisdom with everyone. Thank you again.
Sure thing.
All right. Take care, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you for the next episode. Bye-bye.